You've all seen the template and the video for the drawing portion. So I'm going to jump right in here going wet on dry. And what I'm using for colors in this case is I'm trying out my Rockwell paints again. So I'm using it's a yellow color for there it is right there. And using that yellow for the sky in the background. And I'm adding just a few drops of cadmium orange to it as well. As always, not sure where I'm going with the colors on this thing. I did know that I wanted this house to be, I wanted to go with a yellow house in this case. So I'm just working the sky in the background to accent or complement the color of the house. So I'm starting out with that pale yellow and dropping in some of the cadmium orange. Again, working with my mop brush, and that's all wet on dry. Just moving the paints around. I don't want it to be too crazy in color, but I also don't want it too washed out. Now in the immediate foreground with my sky drying, I've grabbed some pretty rich mix of sepia, and I just did a dry brush approach to create some texture on the road in the foreground. I will go in and glaze over that afterward and use that texture for the road. For my grass, I'm using that yellow, the pale yellow, and just dropping in some olive green. And that's all wet and wet. And here I've grabbed some of my gray mix. So it's a Payne's gray with a bit of purple, and I'm glazing over the texture in the foreground, the road in the foreground, and doing the driveway. It's all dry now, so I can go ahead and paint the fence in the background. That was going to be a hedge, but I was looking at it and I thought it might be a bit too busy, so I'm just going to go with the cedar fence in the background. Now I've gone to my Rockwell primary yellow for the grass in the foreground, and rather than use a green, I've grabbed some cobalt blue, and with that surface being wet with the primary yellow, I'm just dropping in the cobalt blue to see what kind of greens I can come up with. So there, I'm mixing the cobalt with the yellow on the palette and then dropping it into the yellow that's it's in the grass area. So my fence in the background, all wet in wet. Again, same approach as I did over on the left. And even in the tiny areas, I'm going to go to the trouble of doing wet and wet. So that was the burnt sienna, and here comes the Payne's gray with the purple. So there's my Lamy Safari Extra Fine, and I'm using platinum carbon ink. And I'm just defining the edge of that fence, adding a few details. And that's going to give me my hard line for where I can start my houses in the background. The large tree on the right is just a bit behind the house. So I started out with my mop brush, and I'm using that primary yellow, the Rockwell primary yellow. So that's actually a cobalt blue mixed with the primary yellow. And I'm dropping that into the middle of the tree where it's wet. So this is all wet in wet. For the underside of the tree, the shadow side of the tree, I'm using I've mixed in some indigo into my green mix. Now here are the houses in the background. So that's an ultramarine blue, and that's a Foreground I'm using. It's got quite a bit of paint in it. Same thing over here. There's no pencil outline or anything. I'm just marking in some rough shapes of houses. Similar in design to the one that we're, our star here, the main house. So I got the mop brush out again, and I'm grabbing some more of that primary yellow. And that's going to be the base color for my little pointy tree on the left. And there I'm introducing the China red. So same approach as the larger tree. I've painted the base of the tree with the primary yellow, and then using the China red, just dropping it in and seeing what colors I come up with. Kind of liking that, so I'm going to do the same thing over here on the right and have a similar pointy tree. And for the underside of the trees, I grabbed a bit of sepia, just a little bit, and mixed it in with my orange mix for the shadow side of those trees. Again, all wet in wet. I'm just going to see where that goes. My sidewalk, I just put some Davies gray on there, a light wash, and then there I'm scrubbing out the top, but to give it a bit of a highlight. Now this is crazy. This tiny little planter pot in the front yard, I spent so much time on that tiny little thing, and I fussed with that thing over and over again throughout the painting. So I started out by putting in a bit of that red with some burnt sienna, and just put in wet and wet, wet and wet. And just thought that would be good enough. But I'll be back at that. Okay, so painted in a bit of the trunk of the tree. And now for the top part of the chimney, now that the bricks have dried, I'm just using a bit of the Davies gray. And some of the dirty colors that were in the bottom of the palette, just to give it some texture. All wet in wet. And while the chimney is drying, I'm going to get after this trunk of this tree over here. So I've started out with the yellow ochre for the base. And there I'm grabbing some of my reds and browns that were created with the China red and the burnt sienna. A little pool of that there. I'm dropping that into the trunk of the tree, all wet in wet. I'm trying to keep the yellow showing on the left side of that trunk. And I'm darkening up the right side of it, just with some purples and the Payne's gray in there. Just dabbing away and creating texture with the wet and wet. So by the looks of it, my light is going to be coming from the upper left in this case. And right on cue, as always, as soon as I see which side my light is coming from, I got the shadow mix out. That's a combination of ultramarine, Payne's gray, and a bit of purple. I can have some nice deep rich shadows being cast to the right. Far more opportunity for shadow. And of course then I can throw a nice shadow on the fence in the background. And that helps to separate the fence and define the car in the foreground. For my spindly little tree trunk on the left, I have the rigger brush out. And that's a mix of the reds and the browns. Skinny little line, still going wet in wet though. So I started out with a reddy brown look and dropped in some darker colors. Doing the same thing over here on the right for this tree that's a little further back. The base of my house is stone, and I'm going with that's a raw sienna. Getting that nice and wet, and then dropping in some burnt sienna, and then follow it up with some Payne's Gray or some darker colors to create some texture in there. Just trying to create a contrast with the what will be a yellow house, and right on cue, here comes the yellow. So what I thought I'd do is I'd get the front part of the house all painted in, and then start to add some water to it and just lighten things up a bit. And that's nice and damp, so I'm dropping in some burnt sienna for those stones that are showing, or bricks that are showing. For the roof, that's a quinacridone gold that I've grabbed. Pretty heavy mixture of it, and that's the mop brush, so that's holding a lot of paint, and I'm really laying it in there in the hopes of creating some a nice wet in wet effect. I didn't want the windshield of the car to be too dark, so that's a light, really light mix of ultramarine, and I just mopped out the edge where the light would be hitting it. I have some window boxes under the windows, so that was once again wet in wet. So it's a burnt sienna I started with, and I'm just dropping in some Payne's Gray and some of that sepia to dirty up the undersides of it, and of course give them a bit of depth. I'm going with an olive green for all the accents, window trim, door frame. And if you think that's going to be a yellow door, you're mistaken. I started out with the yellow just to brighten up the background a bit, and then coming in with some of the olive green again. I know you were thinking, here comes Gary with another yellow car, but I'm dropping yellow in for the base color of the car and going with the red. So I've got some of the, still have some of that China red in the palette. Well, first of all, just paint the thing in kind of a yellowy orange to get the base color in. And then I dropped in some of the China red and a bit of cadmium red. And I'm going to have a red car. Now, as you can see, my car dried very light, and I want to go darker than that. So I've wet the area, and I'm just going to drop in some more red. And here we are in Canada, so I'm adding some rust to the base of the car. And I couldn't leave well enough alone, so here I'm working on that planter again. And there I'm doing my downspout. Good old hooker's green, wet and wet. So I'll get the area painted in with the hooker's green. And just a dab of the burnt sienna for the rusty parts. Trying to create a nice little, bright little plant in that wretched planter in the front. So I used my primary yellow and dropped in the cobalt to create the green. Again, it complements, kind of matches, and goes with the flow of the foreground and the other trees. My car bumper is supposed to be chrome, so I'm starting out with some Davies gray. And I'll add a bit of water to that just to lighten it up somewhat. And then here comes the rust. So at the base of the bumper, I'm just dropping in some rust, which is the burnt sienna. I'm using quinacridone burnt orange for the decorative stones on the house, just to break up. It's a bit plain there, so I'm using a rather bold color, which is the quinacridone burnt orange. And I'm going wet and wet for all the decorative stones above the windows. And on the underside of those bricks or stones, I'm putting in just a dab of Payne's Gray. So I'm quite happy with the underside of the car. The bumper, the driveway, and the tires, that all worked out really well. Apparently, I saved you the excitement of watching me paint the windows because they're all done. So that was just a light mix of the cobalt that I put in for the windows. And there I'm just enhancing the shadow on the steps. And I didn't want to go too heavy with the ink on the background trees, or any of the trees actually. The focus is on the house. So that's the Rotring 0.10, very super fine point. And I'm just scratching the surface around just to add a bit of ink to the trees just to hold the whole thing together. If I didn't add any ink to it, in my mind, it would look like it was unfinished. So I'm just adding a bit of ink to it. With everything dry, I can now go ahead and add the shingles to my roof. Ink in the last of the little details. It's already signed. So there it is. As always, thanks so much for watching. And we'll see you again soon.